everyone. I'm Jared Carroll, and today I'm joined with a few of my coworkers here at VMware, Kat McDougall, a product manager, Jonathan Van Dalen, a designer, and Tony Thompson, an engineer. And we're here to talk about why we think application performance is an important part of creating a great product. So Tony, how would you define performance?
Yeah, simply put, performance is a measurement of how an application responds under a given workload. Performance can also be thought of as a non-functional requirement that users can feel. Applications that aren't optimized for performance can disrupt the user experience regardless of how well features are implemented. Jonathan, can you help us understand some design considerations for performance?
Sure, yeah. I think the number one thing is to make sure that you're observing your users and really understand their expectations. If you know what's most important to your users, you can make creative use of some techniques like pagination, filters, or other limiters to help people from trying to load everything at once, right, and causing a performance issue. Considering whether you can show some useful information while other information is loading in can be a helpful technique as well. UI can sometimes feel fast, even if it's actually taking a lot of time to load in some additional information that might not be as important. Of course, you can consider the weight and file size of your design assets. SVG or other new formats can be much faster. And, just thinking about like what can be reused versus downloading something brand new each time. When the system is doing some work in the background, you want to handle that with the design, right? So showing an indicator that things are loading, letting the user know, right, what's going on can be very helpful. So that, not only can that let people know what's going on, but it can also prevent them from accidentally making mistakes or misjudging what's happening. Jared, how do you architect for a performance solution?
You always want to measure before deciding if something needs to be more performant. You want to avoid making large-scale changes to parts of the app that you might think would be. You want to avoid making large-scale changes for parts of the app that you might think will be performance problems. For example, you shouldn't introduce caching early on just in case you might think the database will be slow someday. But at the same time, you shouldn't design something that will clearly be a performance issue. So introducing pagination or making sure database queries are using indexes early on are two good practices that won't take a lot of upfront work and could help avoid future performance problems. Ken, from a product management perspective, what does performance mean to you?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Jared. Similar to what Jonathan said during our reliability conversation, you don't get points for a performance solution, but you do get negative points for a non-performant one. Oftentimes as a product manager, you might find that you have performance issues when you're getting many phone calls from stakeholders and users alike, trying to understand why they can't do something that they need to do. So it's important to get out in front of that and prioritize performance tied to learnings from experiments and research that you've done within that product domain. 2x2s are one tool that we use often to visualize the trade-offs that you're making in order to build and share understanding with your team, with your users, and with stakeholders. Some of the work that you need to do in addition to that with that understanding is work with external providers that you're dependent on and help them prioritize their performance as well. You might have heard things like an SLA, SLO in the past, but in order to have that conversation, you have to have a good measure of performance. So Tony, can you talk us through how you actually measure performance?
Sure. I would start with identifying key metrics relevant to your product space and try not to reinvent the wheel. To be more specific, try and leverage third-party metric libraries to track performance. For throughput across a distributed system, explore tracing tools. To isolate where you may be experiencing some degradation, look into profiling solutions for your application. When deciding on an external tool or library, aim for something open source and ideally free. Things do exist to solve this. Ken, I've got another question. How does a team decide when to prioritize performance stories over feature development?
Yeah, Tony. Prioritizing performance versus features is an age-old conversation. And the way that you do that is by understanding what just enough performance is in your product domain. One method is to shape some non-functional requirements, such as the number of users your market has, any network bandwidth constraints that they have, or any compute constraints that you might have on your application as well. Understanding those non-functional requirements help you establish an acceptance environment that is representative of what's expected in a production environment. Parity is key. You need to be able to have a representative environment when you're testing any changes in your application, so that you can instrument your application to observe performance metrics and enable you to shorten that feedback loop of any changes that might be affecting performance before they get into the hands of your users. Dashboards representing those metrics are one method to increase your awareness and increase your observability of what's happening within your application. But it's important to remember not to wait until it is too late to address performance issues. And the last thing I would leave you with is don't ignore performance issues for the sake of features. You need to be deliberate or you will be too late. Jared, what's something that you would like to wrap us up with today?
Sure. Thanks, Ken. I just want to say that good software has to be performant enough. Avoid premature optimization without having good performance data. Avoid large-scale rewrites by having data that makes you re-architect early and prove that it's worth doing. Don't take shortcuts on implementations that will clearly be performance issues. Find the balance between user features and more upfront design that can help avoid future performance problems, and that your entire team should be regularly observing the performance of your application. Thanks everyone for joining us today.